Hey everybody, welcome to the Vanier Cup wrap-up edition of Krown Countdown U. Let's first of all introduce our panelists. You know, the season's over, there's nothing better to do. Here's Gord Randall, and there's Justin Dunk over in Toronto. But now let's go over to Andrew Wadden, who has a complete wrap-up of two old foes that got together for the big one.
Yeah, Jimmy, Calgary looking to break out of their slump against Laval. The last three times Calgary were in the Vanier Cup, they had to face off against the Rouge et Or. The record over those games, 0-3. So to the hammer we go. Tim Hortons Field, where the Red Machine were looking for their first Vanier title since 2013, while the U of C haven't hoisted the Vanier Cup since Jim Mullen had hair. Yeah, way back in 1995. First play of the game, the Dinos take a bite.
Fakes the handoff, going straight to the air and going deep. Got a man wide open, and he's got that man. Michael Klukas, foot race, first play, touchdown, Calgary.
Are you kidding me? Jimmy Underdahl to Michael Klukas, 86 yards later, just like that, it's 7-blank CGY. Very next series for the Dinos, Jimmy hits Hunter Carl. That's a 26-yard pickup. 2 plays later, Anthony Anderson takes it in for 3 yards out. It's now a 2-score game. But Laval would respond. Underdahl deep in his own zone, gets picked. Adam Auclair with the thievery. 1 play later, Hugo Richard to Mark Anthony Piven. Touche Rouge et Or. Very next series for Calgary, Vincent Desjardins gets to Underdahl. The senior already playing on a bum knee, injures it again. His day would be done, so in steps the rook, Adam Sinagra. The teams traded field goals, and we hit the recess with the Dinos up by 7. Second half, it's now a 10-point game. Sinagra gets chased down by Cedric Lucier-Waugh. CLR pops the pigskin loose. Laval recovers. That leads to this major from the other Auclair. This time, it's Anthony's turn to make the highlight reel. Deficit is now cut to just 3. Very next Rouge et Or possession, Richard marches his squad 89 yards on 10 plays. Vincent Alarie Tardif caps the drive, bulldozing his way into the end zone. Laval takes its first lead of the game. Points off turnovers, people. They will kill you. Calgary regains the lead with 2 field goals, under 5 minutes to go, and disaster for the Dinos.
Third down. The all-conference return is before back, and it's blocked. Laval got to it, and it is scooped up. Christian Dallaire.
Check out the elevation just to get that ball. Ensuing possession, Richard calls his own number, and he goes house. What I say about those turnovers, people? But all was not lost for the Dinos. Under 2 minutes to go, Sinagra drives his squad down to the Laval 23-yard line. Mr. McCallum.
Sinagra, straight back, has time, throws wide side. Bailey can't make the catch. Incomplete, and Laval hangs on.
Kelton Bailey can't keep his mitts on the leather. That's the ball game. Laval wins its 9th Vanier Cup in school history, taking this one by sink.
Now it's time for the Weekend Warriors from the big weekend.
And my first Weekend Warrior on a Calgary offense that piled up 553 yards of offense is Jesherin Antwi. 25 carries for 177 yards on the ground. He had great holes opened up and great push by his Hoggies in front. And I identified last week that that was going to be the key to Calgary's attack this week. And that was a big, big check mark for the Dinos.
Calgary's defense might have gave up a lot of yards scored, but one of my Weekend Warriors comes on that Rouge et Or D, and it's Cedric Lucier-Waugh, who had potentially the biggest momentum-changing play in this football game when he stripped Adam Sinagra and recovered it himself. That led to Anthony Auclair's TD to get the momentum back on the Laval sideline. He added 5.5 tackles, tackle for loss as well, to earn the Bruce Coulter Award as the defensive MVP of the game.
My Weekend Warrior, going a little off the board here, is Adam Lorentz. He had a pick at a key time for the Calgary Dinos, and he didn't garner that many stats, even though he should have been registered with a couple of breakups along the way. A lockdown corner who has worked so well with Robert Woodson all year. Might even throw Woodson's name in there, too.
From a starting defensive back to a backup defensive back on the Laval side who made two plays that will go down in Laval lore, and he was forced into action because of some injuries. First, he blocks an Adam Sinagra punt in the fourth quarter that leads to the game-winning touchdown. Then Raphael Robidoux gets a big-time pass knockdown on Kelton Bailey on 3rd and 10 with Calgary driving with not much time left on Laval's 23-yard line to seal the game for the Rouge et Or.
Yes, and I think that we'll be talking about both of those plays you mentioned, Justin, a little bit later in the show. For me, my second Warrior, and there are a number of standouts on that Calgary defense, despite giving up a lot of offense, they were excellent in this game, and I give Tom Higgins full credit. He created pressure. They had 7 sacks of Hugo Richard. They did enough to get off the field most times, but the real standout was Micah Tights, a guy who had 8 tackles individual and 4 assisted tackles. He seemed like he was all over the field at times. I'd also give a shout out to Boston Rowe and Nick Stats. Those guys were also all over the place in this one.
So, fellas, let me get this straight. All of your weekend Warriors are on the losing team in the Vanier Cup. I see just a little bit of Western bias out there on the left coast.
It's actually because we have such great respect for the Laval Rouge et Or, the 9-time Vanier Cup champions. When we come back, we'll have a national roundtable. Stick around.
Krown Countdown U is supported by the Guelph Griffins. Agile, mobile, hostile.
Hey everybody, it's the wrap up to the Vanier Cup. It's a wrap up to the season, so we thought we'd roll Andrew Wadden out here without the red jacket, and we've got Justin Dunk still online back in Toronto. Guys, your impressions about the Vanier Cup. Before we focus on the event, let's talk about the game. Gord, your overall impressions.
Well, I think that this is a game that needs to be characterized as the one that got away for the Calgary Dinos. If you look at the eye test and statistical categories, the Calgary Dinos were the better team in this game, in my opinion, and should have won this game. And Justin was giving us grief for picking all Calgary guys earlier on. The reason I did is because simply I thought they were the better team in this game. But you have a big splash play on special teams, which, by the way, Jim, for both teams, were awful for a national championship in this one. We've got a missed extra point, a blocked punt, a botched onside field goal thing, that weird decision to kick a moonshot when Calgary could have had a long field with 2 minutes left and they hadn't had a return game all day. Like, special teams were not up to par in this one.
Justin, what are your thoughts overall on Vanier Cup, the game?
My number one takeaway has to be the entertainment value, guys. It was a good, fairly well-played football game outside of some mistakes, and we're going to get that with young kids playing football. These aren't pros, and in a national championship game with the Vanier Cup online. So overall, you know, I was on the sidelines and down at the field. It was a great atmosphere. Even though there wasn't maybe the amount of fans you wanted there, you could feel the tension in the building. It was well played, back and forth, action-packed.
Now, Justin was there, I was there, you weren't there. How did you perceive it on TV?
Watching the game itself, I thought Hugo Richard really stood out. And here's a guy that maybe last year we were wondering, hey, what's going to happen with this kid? He was fantastic. As far as the game itself, Laval, I think the coaching really has a lot to do with why the Rouge et Or ended up winning that game. Of course, you know, some dynamic plays on special teams, but also Calgary itself. I mean, how many balls did they drop that they should have caught? Right? We talked about that last play. It was at Kelton Bailey. Yeah, fantastic play by the Laval DB, but let's be honest here. He should have caught that ball. So, yeah, you can give a lot of credit to, Hugo Richard, but really, in the end, I think Laval's coaching staff is what really brought them over the top and were able to beat the Dinos.
And, Jim, I'd like to jump in on the back end of that because Justin Dunk made the point that young guys are going to make mistakes, and Andrew made the point as well with that last play with Kelton Bailey. And Ryan Shane did a marvelous job, a masterful job in this game planning, but I do question the wisdom of giving a guy basically his first start in Kelton Bailey, who's a true freshman, and then going to that guy with the game on the line. That's a lot of pressure for a kid. And Justin, you mentioned it in Weekend Warriors. You love the defensive play there. That was absolutely a catchable ball. And you're a quarterback, man. If you saw that play, you would be choked to your receiver. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a true freshman guy. And I'm not surprised that he dropped that pass because literally the national championship was riding on that.
Well, one of the things about Kelton Bailey was one of the things that have plagued the Calgary Dinos all year long. He was playing injured. He had 2 broken fingers, I believe it was back in week 4, and we saw how thin the Calgary Dinos lineup was without Austin Hartley really in there. They had to switch positions in their offensive line through the game in 3 different positions. I think they had 3 centers in the game. And now it's time for a bit of a mea culpa on my part. I thought the Calgary Dinos were 12.5-point dogs in this game. And I actually thought the Canada West was a lot weaker than it actually was. I thought the UBC Thunderbirds and the Calgary Dinos had come down a notch, and the rest of the pack just kind of stayed in the middle and caught up to them. This is a statement for the Canada West in this game to stick with the Laval Rouge et Or. I think the conference, after seeing this game, and you can only judge it on one game, is likely a lot better than we first anticipated.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you were going into this game, there are 2 battles that you would assume that Laval would win going into this game. That's Laval's offensive line versus Calgary's defensive front. And then Calgary's run game versus Laval's defensive front was also a battle that you figured Laval would win. And in reality, both of those, I'd argue, were won by Calgary, and won cleanly by Calgary. This was an excellent effort, and that's why I say off the top, like, this, in my opinion, is characterized as a game that Calgary let get away.
You know, with Joshua Antwi going off in the game and all those changes on the offensive line against that Laval front, really, Justin, that's is that remarkable, or is that actually to be expected?
Well, that's a tough call, Jim. I thought it was a pretty remarkable performance from the kid who's only in his 2nd year, starting in the national championship game. And we can't forget, he was Calgary's 3rd-string running back, I believe, to start the season. So this guy comes in, has a huge game against a Laval front 7 that is normally pretty dominant.
Yeah, but you have to give props to Jimmy Underdahl just for coming back from the injury, able to play, at least start the game. Looked fantastic on that first play, 86 yards to Michael Klukas. But I mean, in the end, Sinagra came in and did a great job for a rookie. Really, the Dinos have a great future ahead of them with a kid like Sinagra under center.
Okay, now we've got to talk about Vanier, the event. And yes, we saw all the empty seats there. I think it's a big learning curve for those people who are operating U Sports. I think they have the right people in place to turn this thing around. I don't know what the official number is going to be, probably in the 10,000 range. Probably half that in the stadium for this game. The people that came brought a lot of noise in terms of the Calgary fans and the Laval fans. First of all, to you, Justin, what were your impressions of the in-stadium atmosphere? What little of it there actually was?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the crowd was a little bit disappointing, but from how the game was run in terms of, fan experience and giveaways and entertainment value, I think they got a good bang for their buck, the ones that showed up. And that's what we need to figure out in the future, is how to get more people out to this great event and this great national championship.
I think it's one of those things where they really need to look at the marketing and how they're going to approach the marketing moving forward. I mean, the game is supposed to be in Hamilton next year. Is it going to be in Hamilton next year after, them not really showing up at all to support the game? I mean, it makes sense that there wasn't an Ontario team there, and maybe, if Western had have got in, of course, if McMaster had been there, it would have been a complete success. But the numbers that we're seeing right now are not poor, they're dismal. That is terrible for a national championship to look the way it did in those stands. If you're just somebody that's just flying by and happen to see the game on television, you're probably laughing at that crowd, and therefore you're probably not giving the game itself the respect that was due, because that game was fantastic. Those athletes on the field are great athletes, but when you see something like that, and if you're just a drive-by fan of U Sports football or U Sports in general, you're looking at that and you're not even going to give it the time of day because you're going to see what's in those stands, and honestly, that's not fair to the athletes.
It's the 150th anniversary of this country. The Grey Cup is in Ottawa this year. Do the U Sports people maybe think about trying to pair this thing with the Grey Cup and consolidate all that energy around those 2 games? Or do they take the lessons that they learned from Hamilton and apply them again next year in Hamilton?
They can run with either. The biggest issue for me with this Hamilton event is that clearly, and Jim, you touched on it, the Calgary and Laval fans made a lot of noise. Clearly, they did not connect with the local market whatsoever. There were very, very few locals there, very few neutral rooting parties, and that's something that you're going to get if you pair it up with a Grey Cup. Now, as for the debate about pairing it with the Grey Cup, I can see why U Sports would hesitate to do so. You're never going to be the #1 event, although somebody pointed out to me over the weekend that they probably weren't the #1 event in Hamilton this weekend either. Also, you're going to exclude a handful of really good CIS markets that probably deserve to host this game. But you have that interest in football. It's already there. You can package tickets. We've seen successful pairings before, most recent in Toronto and Vancouver the year before that. And the thing about that Vancouver game, I was at that game, and the vast majority of the people there were people who bought tickets for the Grey Cup, added an extra little couple bucks onto it to go to the Vanier Cup as well, and they were just neutral observers that were watching good football, and the energy was great in there. Maybe we open up that debate as to whether this should be paired with the Grey Cup. Again, I can see the arguments on both sides of it, so rare for me, but I'm going to remain kind of non-committal on this one, but it's something that's worth discussing because I agree with you, Andrew, that was not acceptable what we saw on the weekend.
And the thing is, too, is that like 2011, when the Vanier Cup was here, which some will call the greatest game ever, I mean, 22,000 people to see that game. That was incredible. And the fact that you're putting the two together as a football fan, a Grey Cup supporter, it's just perfect. It's the perfect combination for each other. The one thing that the CIS, or excuse me, the U Sports, really hard to get used to that, the one thing that they need to develop, that the CFL has already developed, is the fact that these fans are going to go to the game if it's the Rough Riders, if it's the Red Blacks, if it's the Lions, it doesn't matter. You're getting CFL supporters coming out to those games. So that's what the U Sports needs to try to develop, is to get that, hey, it's an event. It's not just that your team or your school is in it, it's an event and you want to go there. Funny too, on TV, while I was watching the Vanier Cup, there was people draped fully in Saskatchewan Rough Riders gear at that game. You see that at the Grey Cup every single year. You always see people in their team, regardless if they're in the game or not. That's what the U Sports needs to try to develop, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a while to do it, but going to a town like Hamilton and putting on the show that they put on there, they don't get a passing grade.
Justin, you were at the Grey Cup, you were at the Vanier Cup, a lot of negativity around the Grey Cup, and it managed to rise above expectations. What are your thoughts on this?
To be honest, first of all, I'm sick of all the negativity around Canadian football. It is a great product, and there are too many media people in this country that just want to bash the CFL and bash U Sports. Put everything aside, watch the damn football game, and actually see what's going on with this product. It is highly skilled and more entertaining than the game down south. And if you watch the NFL closely, it is turning into a Canadian style of game. They're throwing the football more, rant over. For the CIS, it needs to go to Ottawa next year. As you said, Jim, 150th celebration of this great country. The Grey Cup is there. I don't think it's so much about pairing it with the Grey Cup, but it just needs to be in that city for that reason, because it is the 150th birthday of our great country. Both of our national football championships should be there.
I don't know actually how you can make it work, though. If you've got one broadcast company that controls the Grey Cup, one broadcast company that controls the Vanier Cup, how does everybody just hold hands and get along through this?
Well, and that's the issue, and it's always been the issue in this country with the two sports giants in the broadcasting industry, is that they will never cooperate on anything for the most part, except I guess the Olympics is the only exception. But this should be equated to the Olympics. This is a national event, and I understand that the Grey Cup itself is a huge cash cow, and that TSN wouldn't want to let Sportsnet in on that, but at the same time, the Vanier Cup, relatively speaking, isn't. So I don't know. There should be cooperation, and it would be a shame if that's what the hurdle was that stopped them from pairing this event. Because I can tell you, too, from talking to people that have played in Vaniers that were paired with the Grey Cup, is it feels like more of a big deal than just when you're on your own. Like, this game, I bet if you were to ask the guys from Calgary or Laval, that this felt like just another road game. Like, it really did. When you're paired with the Grey Cup, you get to go to the Grey Cup Festival, you're in this big city, there's all this media hoopla, you have press conferences, all this kind of good stuff. I mean, press conferences that more than 5 people attend. I mean, it's a big deal. It feels like a big deal, fires the players up.
And, the one thing, too, is that you talk about the two, Sportsnet and TSN and how they don't necessarily want to work together on it, but, really it improves both their products. So why they wouldn't want to come together on it is kind of a head scratcher. I mean, Sportsnet really more than anybody, and I know, Justin, of course, you work for them, but it would be good for Sportsnet to team this up, to try to get to this game to be where we think it should be. And the fact that if they can put it together with the Grey Cup and, hey, work in lockstep with TSN, it's just better for everybody. Now, of course, that's probably not going to happen, though.
Gord, I think you hit the nail on the head here with what we do in this country with the Olympics, is that everyone, no matter the broadcasters, whether it's Sportsnet, the three-letter, CBC, come together for the betterment of our country to bring those stories and pictures to life. So why not do it with arguably, the Grey Cup is arguably the biggest television event in this country, even though it's a singular event. So why not do that for a national championship on both fronts? And especially, I don't want to seem like I'm Vanier Cup biased, but especially for the Vanier Cup, because it is largely all Canadians on the field who are real, true student athletes.
Well, we might actually have a window with Canada 150, and maybe everybody can get along. Justin, I'm going to throw it back to you. What do you think, if you had one thing that you would like to see in CIS football in 2017, what would it be?
You know where I'm going here, Jim. Some sort of a crossover interconference game on a weekly basis. I really, truly believe that this game, when it's played by the best teams in this country, the Vanier Cup was a great example of that, is a highly entertaining product, and we need those games to happen on a weekly basis to continue to build the buzz before we get to the Vanier Cup. It's one thing just to pop up and have a great game every year, but if we can get sort of the fair weather football fans in this country tuning in to high-level products on this side of the border instead of, let's say, Michigan, Ohio State, we're going to be a lot better off.
Well, I honestly don't think that's going to happen for 2017. I think the calendar's rolled along now that maybe 2018 is a possibility. Andrew, what would you like to see in CIS football or U Sports football moving forward?
You got a second, because there's a lot of things that I'd like to see.
Pick one.
I'm just going to pick up off of what Justin said. I mean, the national interlock it's what's needed. I mean, why do we have some of these terrible games that we see throughout the season? Why does Waterloo playing Western? I mean, who wants to see that? I don't want to see that. You don't want to see that. Justin doesn't want to see that. The rest of the country doesn't want to see that. Let's get these games that the people want to see on television. And that's another thing. Let's get them on television, not just in certain parts of the country where they can just see it here and they can just see it there. I mean, the Yates Cup, for instance. Why was the Yates Cup not on national television this year? The Yates Cup will get more viewers than the Vanier Cup. I mean, there's more people in Ontario than there is in all of Canada. So why isn't something like that on television? I want to see it get promoted better, and I want to see it on a national scale, not on a regional scale.
But if there's going to be no national interlock in 2017, is this not an opportunity for U Sports and some of the conferences to maybe capitalize on the big homecoming games and the big rivalries and the regional games that you could put together in a package to at least take one step before you went fully national on this stuff?
Nail on the head, Jim. That was a perfect segue to my point. And what I would like to see in the CIS in 2017 is more games that are made into events. We saw it with the Panda game this year. And the fact that I can only really name one of those games off the top of my head is sad. Like, these are games, there are natural rivalries throughout the CIS. You've got a campus full of audience sitting right there. They need to do a better job of marketing the product from top to bottom. And we focused at the top end in this episode because we've been looking at the national championship, but on a week-to-week basis, this product needs to be marketed better. So that's at the top of my CIS Santa's wish list for this year, as well as parity in the OUA and creativity in schemes.
I'll tell you what, though, when people talk about marketing, they throw it out there as a word. I'm not sure how much they know about all the layers that go into marketing and the effort and the coordination and the focus and the patience that needs to go in it. Is U Sports or any of the conferences out there in your mind, Justin, capable of having that sort of structure to do it? Or does it come from the schools? And can it be even successful if you're doing one-offs with the schools all over the place?
It could be successful in one-offs. Obviously, we see there's some big homecomings around Ontario. I'll sort of stick out here to what I know best. There's some great homecoming events that are really sold as just what Gord said, events. And then there's a big game like the Panda game that is obviously huge down in the nation's capital. Now, I think this starts with the schools individually, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm a marketing expert, but the schools sort of need to get the ball rolling on this so that the conferences can pick it up when we get to later in the season in the playoff games and the conference championships. Now, I'll sort of make an amendment to what I want to see because, as you said, Jim, it's unlikely we say a playoff in 2017. What I would like to see in 2018 is students getting in for free to every single regular season U Sports football game. Put butts in the seats, get them there to see the product, and get them feeling good and prideful about their school. That's what the Americans do in the NCAA so well, and I think that would go a long way. I know that goes against Marketing 101, and you're not making any money that way, but trust me, it's going to pay off down the road.
Well, the biggest challenge seems to be getting butts in seats, and we know that there's a fantastic product there, and maybe the student aspect outside of one or two games, like a Frosh game, has been generally ignored by athletic departments across this country, and they just see a cash ticket. Maybe it's time for more free student seating.
Absolutely. And the thing is, too, it's like, like Justin said, it's like, oh, well, it goes against marketing because they're not getting money. Yeah, they're getting money. I mean, you've got, in-house sales, you've got beer sales. I mean, you got merchandise. There's all kinds of ways that you can still make money behind this product. You know how you're not making money? Charging students to go to the games. That's how you're not making money.
And Justin touched on the most important aspect, which is the identity aspect of it too. And it's a positive snowball effect if you get that going. And I'm totally with you, Andrew. Like, you make money off of people in the stadium. Even if they don't pay for that little piece of cardboard that they hand you on the way in, there's other things that they can spend their money on. And yeah, sure, students probably aren't going to drop $100 at each game, but that's the reality of what you're working with. You're working with students. The other thing that schools need to do a better job of as well, though, on that note, is being in touch with the alumni and keeping their alumni engaged. Because too often alumni leave the school, totally divorce themselves from the things that go on with it. And that's what I'm talking about when I say snowball effect. Because if you build that's part of the identity of going to that school, like that's what I loved about Queens so much when I went there, is it was part of the identity of going to that school that you went out to this football event every Saturday in the fall, and that's what it's like in the States.
So that'll do it for this regular season and the playoff season for Krown Countdown U. We will be back in January with monthly shows, but for now, let's get out to the off season.